On the Late Kick Extra podcast on Thursday, which we release every Tuesday and Thursday morning, you can find the Late Kick podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We release a product on Tuesday and Thursday that's audio only. You don't see it on the YouTube channel. And I take Q&A. It's all mailbag. And so Corbin submits a question, and he said, how did Late Kick get to 24/7? Essentially what he was talking about is, at once upon a time, you were independent. You had your own YouTube channel. And then all of a sudden, you're here. And I've shared bits and pieces of that, but I've never really told that story. And so I chose to just carve out some time at the end of the podcast, just like we are at the end of the show. And we got such overwhelming feedback on it. I mean, by the time the day was over, dozens and dozens of you, maybe hundreds, had submitted emails or DMs and said, I loved that story. Tell more of those. So I figured we ought to put this on the YouTube channel because a lot of you just watch the show here and you don't listen to the podcast. And so I wanted to give you a chance to hear this. A lot of you are going to be interested in this, and I think there's a lot to be taken away from it, even if you're not in sports media, if you just like the show, but maybe, you drive trucks for a living. There's a lot, I think, to be learned from the atypical path that some of us, myself included, had to take to rise up to, any kind of relative stature in the sports media industry. So this is the exact audio from our Thursday Late Kick Extra podcast. Take a listen. Corbin submits the question. He said, would you be able to give a summary of your broadcasting career on the podcast or just in an email reply? I hear you often drop a reference here and there of different places you've been. I was just curious how you got into broadcasting, where did you start, how did you get involved with CBS and 24/7, and how do you have the platform you currently enjoy? I appreciate this question. One day probably I'll be able to just do an hour's speaking circuit version of this, because I think my story is very fun. I think it's very valuable, though. It's valuable because it doesn't matter if you don't have a lick of talent in the world of media. You got talent somewhere. You need to figure out what it is. You need to figure out where it overlaps with your passion and just draw a circle there and find how many careers you can isolate in that little intersection, that circle around the intersection of talent and passion. It should be the focus of everyone's life. You didn't get your talent yourself. Someone gave it to you. It was put inside you. It's there to be used. It's not there to just bottle up and only use in your spare time or use as a hobby or don't use at all. And your passion's the same way. It's very beautiful because everyone's unique in that way. No one has the exact combination of talent and passion that you do. And yet we got a lot of people in our business and in our world that try and emulate others where you're not designed to be anyone else. You're designed to be yourself. So anyway, my reason for saying that is I didn't get that for a long time. And so I looked elsewhere for inspiration. Inspiration's fine. I'm not saying I haven't been inspired by people, but I was looking to other people as a model of how I should live or how I should approach my career. That's not the way to do it. You can take guidance, you can draw hints and clues, but there's something in you that's not in them. And there's something in them not in you. So in a lot of ways, it really becomes a waste of time to do that. I'll tell you what happened. I was working construction, knew I didn't want to do it the rest of my life, learned a lot of lessons there, though. Ended up in a fabric warehouse, non-air conditioned, this time of year especially. That's just torturous in Georgia. And I would listen to sports talk radio every single day. That was the day. You get in, you unload the Southeastern freight truck, you listen to Colin Cowherd at that time at ESPN Radio, you get to lunch, you get back in, you got whatever show on ESPN Radio happens in the afternoon. Then there was an afternoon drive show. And then that's the end of the day. I mean, that was my entire day. I just listened to sports talk radio all day. Loved it. Always had been enamored with it. Thought I had a little bit of talent and skill enough to do it. Had no clue how to do it. I didn't have a dad who worked at a radio station. I didn't have a mom who was an accountant in Bristol, Connecticut at ESPN. I didn't have a cousin who owned his own conglomerate of local TV stations. I had nothing. I had no contacts. I had no relationships. I didn't have the college degree at the time necessary. I'm going to say necessary loosely. I thought it was necessary. But I knew I wanted to do it. I just didn't know how. So I sat in that sample department in that warehouse for a couple of years, and that was my day every day. Not getting any younger. And so the local radio show that was there in Columbus was called The Press Box. It was hosted by a guy named Bobby Z. He had been a big-time FM DJ in several of the big markets, Houston most notably. But he loved sports, and so he came to Columbus to do sports talk radio. And so I would listen every day. I listened for about a year. And I finally got up the nerve to email him or Facebook message him, I think. And I said, can I just come in and watch the show? I've never seen it before. I've never been in a studio. I didn't expect to get an answer. And I got an answer really quick. He said, yeah, come on in. And I started to come in. And I brought in some of my demo material, some of my reel material. And all that is, for those unfamiliar, is you get yourself in a studio or just put a microphone in front of you, record yourself, boom, you got a demo reel. Hopefully it sounds decent enough. And so I gave it to him. I didn't know if he had listened to it or not, but I got to sit in the radio station and I got to see production happen for the first time. I got to see how you pod someone up when they're coming in. I got to see how you provide audio beds when you're going to do a produced segment. I got to see how call structure was formatted. I got to see how you hit your hard ins and hard outs. I got to see all that stuff. And so it was great because unbeknownst to myself, I had always observed instead of just listened and watched. I'd always observed, and so a lot of it made sense. You didn't have to tell me twice why you were doing something. Well, a few weeks go by, and his co-host gets sick one day, and I can come in there, and I can just watch and watch and watch until all of a sudden I get told, hey, Pun's not in today. Can you hop on air? And I said, yes, I can. It was the middle of football season, and we took calls for 3 hours, highlight of my life, thought it was the only time I was ever going to be able to do it. We wrap up the show. He says to me, that was a good job. I thought we were going to crash and burn. We didn't. It was a really good job. Appreciate you hopping in on a moment's notice. Where'd you say you would work before? I said, I've never worked before. He thought I was lying to him because I did a good enough job on air that he thought I had made that up. He thought I had been somewhere else, and I just came in there and I was lying about not having experience. Don't know what sense that would make, but he thought I was lying. I said, no, I've never worked anywhere. I've never been in media anywhere. And I never got taken off the air again. I was given a permanent spot there. It was a 3-man booth when I was in there because the co-host came back, Pun came back, and I was still in there. And so we had some fun, man. It was so blazing hot in that studio because there was no air circulation. Probably an OSHA violation, but we didn't report it because we were getting to do sports talk radio. And they actually paid us a little bit of money to do it too. Legendary shows. Very, very much flying in the face of what FCC regulations typically allow you to do. But we were just enough off the radar where it didn't matter there in Columbus, Georgia. But that's a big break. But I'll tell you where an even bigger break came, and I tweeted this out today, actually, and it was sort of inspired by knowing I was going to talk about this. I'm recording in the evening, and so you're listening to this the next day. But I knew I was going to talk about this tonight, so I tweeted it out earlier today. I said, the best advice you can ever have, in this line of work especially, is to treat every day like your job interview. This is not a classical situation. Sports media in general, it's not a classic situation. If you're in performance-based art in general, you do not get hired because of your job interview or your resume or your college degree. You get hired based on whether you can produce or not. I've interviewed for radio now, TV, and 247 and CBS. No one ever even asked me where I went to school. They didn't care. They had already seen what they needed to see. So my next big break is tied right into that. I'm sitting at home one day. I get a phone call. Phone call is from a general manager at a TV station there in Columbus. He said, you don't know this, but I've been listening to you every day driving home for about a month now. I get off work about the time you're on radio. Me and the sales team over here, we got an idea. We want to do a 5-night per week live college football call-in show on TV. You want to do it? I said, yeah, I think I do. And so I start at WLTZ there in Columbus, Georgia. Ended up being the sports anchor there too and the sports director in time. Not qualified, to be blatantly honest with you. Coworkers knew I wasn't qualified. There may have been a little bit of animosity. I don't blame them one bit. Over time, those people became my best friends. So what happened was I finally got to do TV. Had never done it before. Never. Had never been in a TV studio. The first time I was ever in a TV studio, I was on live TV. First time I ever read a teleprompter or looked at a camera or did a transition 3-shot to 1-shot. I was on TV, live. Didn't get any practice. It was rough for a little while. And that was just the sports anchoring portion. Formatting and blocking and producing the actual college football show, that was a whole bigger chore in and of itself. But we grew that thing over time. We had a really hardcore audience there in Columbus. You'd call them a P1 audience if you're in radio, but they are diehard. They're there every night. We were hitting at 10 o'clock on the D2 channel, the CW channel there. But we had viewers, and we did pretty good. And so we keep doing that and keep doing that. A couple of years go by. I got a buddy named Jonathan Rivers that I co-hosted the show with. Some of the most fun times we ever had. We were also, just to get extra practice in, doing an extra Friday night 3-hour radio show over at WCUG, The Cougar, on the corner of 9th and Broad. It's the Columbus State University radio station. I had a large part in helping to build and format that entity entirely. We were some of the first programming. especially long-form live programming that they ever played there. And so Jonathan and I, we do that show at WLTZ for a little while, Football Nightly Down South. Never forget that name as long as I live. And one day, I'm looking on my phone or just on my laptop, and I'm on Facebook, and I see a Facebook live stream. Never seen it before. It was a brand new feature. YouTube Live wasn't around yet. I saw a Facebook live stream, and you know how sometimes you hear people tell stories about the past, and they say, I knew the second I saw this, or I knew the second I saw that. Most of the time, it's BS. Most of the time, the big realizations in your life, they don't happen just like that. They happen over time. Well, friends, this is one of the very few realizations that it took me a microsecond to realize. I knew the second I saw a Facebook live stream, the entire world was changing. I knew I needed to change my entire world. I knew that's where the future is. That is how I take what I want to be a national voice and a national approach to college football and actually reach the masses with it. Here's how big, you can't understand unless you're in media how big this was. This was a Berlin Wall moment in sports media. The two main roadblocks that would stand between myself or anyone else even remotely in my shoes and making it nationally were overhead and distribution. It's why we idolized SportsCenter anchors or ESPN radio hosts growing up. There were so few of them, and we viewed them almost in a deified manner because they were somewhere that you probably can never get because of overhead and distribution. Overhead meaning you need massive studios and massive infrastructure. And then more importantly, really, the second part is distribution. How are they taking your product and getting it to someone in Tupelo, Mississippi and Salem, Oregon at the same time? It used to be called syndication, and it still is. That was the only way. And then all of a sudden, we've got the largest social platform on the face of the earth. There were already several billion people on Facebook at the time, and you're telling me that platform has a live streaming mechanism? You cannot possibly understand how big that was. I mean, I didn't sleep for nearly a week just envisioning what that could be. So here's what I started to do. I don't know if footage of this still exists, but here's what I started to do. I had been promoted to news anchor since that point. So I'm news anchoring. I'm anchoring the 6 o'clock news. When we get off air, I take my jacket off. I go in our control room because it looks really cool. A lot of buttons and monitors, and it looks like a NASA space station in Houston. And so I start taking my cell phone and just doing Facebook Live videos and doing college football the way I want to do it. And management catches on about a week into that. General manager calls me into his office and says, "What is this?" I say, "That's just something I'm doing on the side." He said, "Well, it looks to me like you're doing it in my control room, and it looks to me like you're on the clock here, so it's on company time, and it doesn't look like I could stand to make a dime from this, so what point is there in letting you do this?" And I didn't have a rebuttal. Of course, he's right. He's not saying anything I wouldn't say if I were in his shoes, but man, that lit a fire under me because I, for the first time, shifted from thinking that was a golden opportunity I had to a place that I was stuck. So I had about a year left on my contract at that point. I took the next year to plan and plan and plan. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I knew exactly how I wanted to do it. I learned YouTube in that year. And I learned that I wanted to be a multi-platform streaming product that I owned. It comes time to negotiate contract. I get called into the news director's office with the general manager. They offer to extend me several years. It would have been really good money. I mean, unheard of money for me at the time. And I declined it because it was not going to include the opportunity to produce my own show that I owned on my own platform. And it was just not something that they were going to bend on. And so we stalemated. My contract's coming up. I have not renewed, and it looks like we're just going to say all's well that ends well. We go our separate ways. One day before my contract expires, I get called back in, and they had essentially been sweating me. And so it didn't work because I had no intention of re-signing if I could not do what I wanted to do. And so I get called back in, and they said, "What is the deal? Like, what do you have lined up?" I said, "I didn't have anything lined up." And that was the truth. I didn't have anything lined up. I was going to go somewhere and start a YouTube channel. That's what I was going to do. I was that confident in the vision I had. I had no guarantee. I mean, I was broke already. And so they said, "What can we do here? I mean, we got to figure something out. We cannot let you as a salaried employee do what you want to do." And so we figured out a workaround. I offered to work 1099 status for them fractions of the money they would have paid me. I'm not employed, so you don't have to give me benefits. I'll still be your news anchor, but here's what I want in return. I want an hour of studio time 3 nights a week and the ability to bring my own crew in here, and we want to film live a YouTube college football show. And they agreed to it very quickly. They agreed to it. They made sure the studio time was blocked off, and they agreed to it and thought that they had kind of one-upped me there. They hadn't. They just didn't know it yet. So I was making no money, really doing. I was making $50 or $75 per newscast. You want to do the math on that. And but we started our show. We built our own set. We had to build it every night. We had to wheel it in there and wheel it out of there every night. And we did that show, and we called it Late Kick Live with Josh Pate, the exact same name it's got now. And we did it on YouTube just like it's done now. And we've started to grow that subscriber base, and we reached the necessary benchmarks to monetize that thing. And over the span of about 8 months, I was making more on that YouTube channel than I had been making at the news station. And a year in, I was making more than I would have been making on salary there. I was on top of the world, man. I was so happy because it paid off. I mean, it looked like there was legitimate traction. I mean, we were getting some attention. LSU put us in their hype video the week before they played Bama in 2019. Here was the kicker, though. Since I was still associated with the news station, I could get credentialed to games under WLTZ's name. And so I could go shoot my own B-roll. See, the big roadblock for a lot of content creators is they don't have rights and licensing to any video. They don't have elements to use. I was able to do a workaround because I could be credentialed to games and go shoot my own footage and have my own library of B-roll. And it gave me a huge leg up, as did being able to produce a show on YouTube out of a full working TV studio. Could literally have never guessed what was about to happen. November of 2019, show's doing really good. We are really, really high on LSU ahead of time. It pays off. We're riding a wave of momentum. We're starting to get traction. We're starting to be seen enough by college football diehards that it's on people's radars. And I get a call in November of 2019 from Shannon Terry, who was, as you know, the CEO of 247Sports at the time. I let it go to voicemail. I didn't recognize the number. I thought it was spam. It's probably a story I'll tell until the end of time. Yeah, I noticed the name pretty quick on the voicemail, so I call him back. He said, in not so many words, he said, I know that you don't realize this, but we've been watching you. I've been watching your stuff for about a month and a half or 2 months. I can't believe once he heard my story, he said, I can't believe you're able to pull that off. You shouldn't be able to pull that off, but I want you to come pull it off here. We don't even know fully what we want you to do. Whatever you're going to do, I want you doing it here. I want you to come here and create for us at 24/7 and CBS. And so I talked with him for about the next 2 weeks. We worked the contract out, and I got here in January of 2020. And sure enough, everything I was promised has been followed through on. I was given full naming rights, full creative control over my show, full executive production status of my show. No one to this point in time at 24/7 or CBS has ever stepped in and told me a thing to put on that show. They've never told me a thing to take out of the show. They've never told me not to do anything on the show. So I want you to think about that 2-year swing. You're going from being 1 day away from being unemployed to 2 years later, one of the biggest media companies on planet Earth handing you the keys to their resources and saying, hey, why don't you come here and we'll triple whatever you were making. And by the way, all you have to do all day is talk about college football. I knew the moment I got here, if we could ever just make sure we can get the product in front of enough people, I thought you guys would love the show because it was going to be your show. That's all it's ever been about. That's all it's ever been intended to be. But without that distribution, without the ability to get your product out, it's kind of like, yelling in a forest, but there's no one around to hear it. You can do the best job in the world. If you don't know how to market and get your product out there, it can be rendered irrelevant a lot of times. But we've gotten it in front of you. And it's taken off even to a greater extent than we thought. And I had some pretty lofty goals for it. But you guys have blown away every goal that I had for our stuff when we came here. And let me tell you what you've done. I talk about this a lot. I tell you as much as I can tell you and maybe a little bit more than I can tell you. But we get about a year in, and all of a sudden the calls you start getting are from CBS Sports and from executives that have been all over the media industry. And the ones handling your contract negotiations for your next round, they're right at the top of the totem pole. And you got family and friends that support you back home, constantly hear from them, and it feels really good. But let me tell you the bigger feeling I have, and I'll wrap it up after this because this is probably going on like 30 minutes. The biggest feeling I have and the biggest source of excitement is last year wasn't normal. We got here and we started that show on the 247 Sports YouTube channel in the middle of March. And then we went into lockdown, and then we didn't know if we were going to have a season. And it was an election year, so everyone's attention was fragmented. We got fractions of a season. We did not have full investment emotionally from the college football public because there was a lot going on last year. And still, the show was an overwhelming success. So what happens now? A year in, we have refused to take an off season. We just won't do it. And now we're heading headlong in towards a season where everything returns to normal. If even normal turned up to 11 on the volume scale, we've got a fully established product. We've got great distribution channels. We've got great listenership and viewership. We've got new production hires that will be made public eventually that really just add new dynamics and layers to the show. What happens when all that comes together? Well, we're going to make it the biggest college football show in the country. That's what we're going to do. We're going to make it the best in the country. We are very appreciative. I'm very appreciative, very humbled, very honored and blessed to have the opportunity. We'll never take it for granted, have never taken it for granted a day in my life. But now that the opportunity is there, we're going to grab it by the throat. There will be none better out there than what we give you this fall. There will not be a college football product on planet Earth that's better than what we give you with Late Kick this fall. So, Corbin, that's an up-to-date picture of the old broadcast career. Let me add one more thing in there, because one of the other huge blessings you have when you can work for a major organization like this is we can keep the content free. I can keep Late Kick free. I don't have to charge you. I am not bemoaning anyone who has to charge for their content. Please don't misunderstand me. If you're working in the independent world, you have to get by any means necessary. That's why I'm referring to it as a blessing that we get to produce for free. The only thing I ask of you guys is follow that Twitter account at LateKickJosh. Follow that Instagram account at LateKickJosh. Make sure you're subscribing to the 247 Sports YouTube channel and liking those videos. The likes really help. Commenting really helps. But let me tell you what means the most to me. When I see you guys tweeting out, as I've said before, screenshots that you're listening to the podcast or you're watching the show and you tag me in them, I try and retweet as many of them as I can. We get dozens and dozens and dozens per day. That is what means the world, because it is the way that this kind of show should be marketed. I don't want to go to the CBS ad executive folks and say, hey, we need $75,000 in our marketing Q1 budget because we need to manufacture excitement for the show. That's not the way I've ever successfully been marketed to. It probably doesn't work for you either. But if you see one of your buddies voluntarily on their Instagram story or their Twitter account put out evidence that they're listening to a show, Late Kick, Cover 3, whatever the case may be, that's how you get me. And that's how we grow this show. We're not spending a dime marketing this show. We're not marketing it anywhere. We're counting on you. That's how we've grown this show. That's how we'll continue to grow the show. So that's what I ask you guys to do. Tell your buddies, tell your friends, put it out there on your IG accounts and your Twitter accounts. We do that. We will have everything that we want to have with this show.